In the quiet, sun-kissed village of Dovuma, where life moved gently and the sound of laughter echoed through the dusty paths, there lived a young girl named Khalifa. She was the kind of girl whose presence could calm a storm. Her eyes sparkled with innocence, and her smile carried a softness that made even the hardest hearts feel at peace. Though her clothes were simple and her sandals worn out, there was something royal in her spirit, something that made everyone feel warmth in her presence. Khalifa was not born into riches. Her father worked as a simple basket weaver, and her mother grew vegetables in their little garden behind their mud house. But what they lacked in gold, they had in love. Khalifa grew up surrounded by humility and values. She would wake up early to fetch water from the stream, help her mother in the garden, and still make time to teach the village children how to read under the old baobab tree. The elders often said, "This girl carries light in her soul," and truly she did. She was the kind of person who never turned her back on anyone. If an old woman needed help carrying firewood, Khalifa was there. If a child fell and scraped their knee, Khalifa would tear a piece of her own cloth to wrap the wound. Even animals found comfort in her. Birds would follow her around the fields, and stray dogs wagged their tails at the sound of her voice. She was gentle, humble, and selfless. Everyone's daughter, everyone's friend. But beyond her kindness, there was a quiet strength in her. Even when times were hard and there was barely food on the table, Khalifa would still find a way to smile. She believed in hope. She believed that no matter how dark the night, the sun would always rise again. People often wondered how such a small girl could carry so much grace in her heart. But Khalifa never saw herself as special. She was simply doing what she believed was right. However, life does not always reward the pure-hearted immediately. Sometimes, fate tests the strongest souls in the cruelest ways. What Khalifa didn't know was that her life was about to take a sharp turn. A storm was silently building far away from her village, and it was heading straight toward her peaceful world. She had no idea that soon, her innocent hands would be tied to a destiny far beyond her understanding, a destiny filled with danger, fear, and unimaginable pain. But what makes this story truly powerful is not the storm that came, but how Khalifa, this quiet village girl, would stand in the middle of it and shine even brighter. The world would soon see that sometimes the strongest warriors come not with swords, but with hearts full of kindness. Khalifa's journey was just beginning, and the winds of change were already whispering her name. Far away from the peaceful village of Dovuma, in the chaotic heart of Kiranzi city, lived a man whose name made even the boldest men tremble, Zubari. He was not just a man, he was a living storm, the king of the underworld, feared and respected in equal measure. People whispered his name in fear, Zubari, the snake of Kiranzi. He ruled the city's darkest corners with iron fists and cold eyes. No law touched him, no heart moved him. He was untouchable. Zubari led the Mavuno Syndicate, a powerful and violent gang that controlled everything: drugs, weapons, money, and lives. If someone disobeyed him, they vanished. If someone stood in his way, they bled. His enemies called him a monster, and his followers called him a god. He lived in a fortress guarded by men who would kill without blinking. His empire was built on pain, betrayal, and blood. And yet, he kept rising, feared more with every passing day. He carried deep scars on his body, each one a memory of the countless wars he had fought and won. But even more frightening were the scars no one could see, the ones buried deep in his heart. Zubari hadn't always been like this. Long ago, he had been a boy who believed in love, in family, in trust. But the world broke him. Life had stolen everything from him: his mother, his brother, his peace. And when he cried, no one came. When he begged, no one listened. That was the moment Zubari died, and the warlord was born. People feared his guns, but they never understood the pain behind them. His eyes were always cold, not because he had no emotions, but because he had buried them so deep they could never come out again. He taught himself never to care, never to feel, never to trust. Love, he believed, was a weakness, a trap that could destroy even the strongest man. So he turned his heart into stone and his soul into fire. And in that fire, he built his empire. Every night, Kiranzi city lit up with the sound of gunshots and sirens, while Zubari sat in his dark throne room, watching the world burn outside his window. People only saw his cruelty, his violence, his rage, but none saw the lonely man behind the mask. He had no friends, no peace, no softness left in him. His life was a battlefield, and he had made himself the strongest warrior in it. Yet even the strongest warriors have wounds. Even the coldest hearts remember warmth. And though Zubari had locked his pain away, deep inside him, a small part still longed for something different. But he didn't believe he deserved it. Not anymore. Not after all the blood he had spilled. Not after all the lives he had taken. But fate, that strange and unpredictable force, had other plans. Zubari didn't know it yet, but his dark world was about to be shaken. And the storm would not come with bullets or betrayal. It would come with a girl, a gentle flower from a small village, who would change everything he thought he knew about life, love, and himself. Khalifa's peaceful world came crashing down the day her father, Munaki, returned home with eyes full of worry and shoulders heavy with shame. He had borrowed money from a powerful city figure, hoping to buy farming tools and medicine for his sick wife. But fate played a cruel game. He couldn't repay the debt. That man was no ordinary lender. It was Chief Katembo, a ruthless and corrupt politician, whose name sent chills through every honest heart. He was a man whose handshake came with hidden chains, and those who crossed him often vanished without a trace. One morning, a black car pulled into Davuma village, a sight so unfamiliar, the children stopped playing. Out stepped the chief's men with cold faces and sharp words. They came not for the money, but for something more valuable. Chief Katembo had made a wicked deal behind closed doors. He offered to wipe Munaki's debt clean, but in return, he demanded Khalifa, your daughter, or your dignity, he said with a smile that dripped poison. Munaki wept. He begged, but the chief's men didn't care for tears. They dragged Khalifa away like she was a prize, not a person. Her cries echoed in the air, but the village could do nothing. Everyone watched helplessly as the flower of Davuma was taken from her roots. Khalifa's heart shattered, but she didn't allow fear to consume her. Her mother collapsed in grief, and her father's soul broke that day, haunted forever by the choice he was forced to make. Khalifa was taken to the chaos of Karanzi city, a place filled with noise, smoke, and shadows. She had never seen such tall buildings or heard such cruel laughter. She was dressed in an expensive wedding gown, not out of love, but as part of a trade. Her hands trembled as strange women painted her face, but her spirit remained strong. Deep inside, a fire had begun to burn, a quiet flame of courage. Then came the moment she met the man the world feared, Zubari. He stood tall in a black suit, his face unreadable, his eyes cold like winter nights. The ceremony was short, emotionless, like a business transaction. People clapped, but there was no joy. Khalifa looked around and saw no family, no friends, no familiar smiles, only strangers and guns. And yet, she didn't cry. She didn't plead. As they stood side by side, she slowly turned to face him. Her voice was soft but steady as she looked into his cold eyes and whispered, "I am not afraid." That moment, small as it seemed, struck Zubari like thunder. He had expected fear. He had expected trembling and silence. But instead, he saw fire in her eyes. Not hatred, not love, but strength, a kind he had not seen in years. Khalifa, though forced into this life, was not going to be broken so easily. Zubari didn't know it yet, but that quiet girl from a village had just planted the first seed of change in his dark world, and from that seed, something powerful was about to grow. Zubari brought Khalifa into his fortress like a man collecting a possession, not a bride. He gave her a room, cold, distant, far from his own chambers. He didn't speak much, didn't look her in the eyes, and didn't dare trust her presence. To him, she was just another pawn in a cruel game, another woman who would eventually try to escape or betray him. That's why he didn't touch her, not out of respect or kindness, but because he thought she wouldn't last. He believed her softness would melt in the fire of his world, but Khalifa stayed. Every morning she rose before the sun. She walked quietly through the corridors of chaos, greeting no one, expecting no smiles. She entered the cold kitchen and cooked meals, though no one asked her to. She placed food in front of Zubari's door without a word, and when he returned with blood on his hands, she cleaned his wounds gently, saying nothing, just wrapping his pain in silence and care. She found a dead corner of the mansion, a small abandoned garden covered in dust and weeds. Where others saw decay, Khalifa saw life. She watered the soil, planted new flowers, and whispered prayers into the earth. Each day, she sat there, hoping something beautiful might grow again, even in the middle of darkness. The men of the Mavuno syndicate laughed at her. They mocked her soft voice, her plain clothes, her foolish kindness. "She thinks prayers can clean blood?" one sneered. Why treat a monster like a man? Another asked. But Khalifa never responded. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just kept doing what her heart knew best, showing care no matter the place or the person. She treated Zubari not like a beast, but like a man who had forgotten what it felt like to be human. When he sat alone in his office, she brought him warm tea. When he had nightmares and screamed into the night, she stood silently outside his door, waiting in case he needed someone. She never tried to change him with words, only with presence, only with compassion, and slowly, something inside Zubari began to shift. He started noticing the little things, the scent of herbs from the kitchen, the fresh flowers in the hallway, the softness in her footsteps. For the first time in years, he came home to warmth instead of cold silence. He watched her from afar, trying to understand her. Who was this strange girl who smiled in a place built on fear? Why didn't she run? Why didn't she curse him like the others did? At night, when everyone slept, Zubari would sit in the garden Khalifa had revived. He would look at the blooming flowers and feel something unfamiliar in his chest, a flicker of peace, a memory of life before the blood, before the violence. He didn't know it yet, but Khalifa's silent strength was breaking through his iron walls. She wasn't fighting him with weapons or threats. She was winning him over with love, patience, and quiet resilience. And that was a war Zubari had never prepared for. Zubari had built his world on power, fear, and control. To him, love was a luxury for the weak, a dangerous distraction in a world where trust could cost a life. But ever since Khalifa entered his life, something inside him had started to shift, slowly, quietly, like a river cutting through stone. He didn't know when it began exactly, but he found himself drawn to her presence, not in desire, but in curiosity, in wonder. He would stand behind doors, hidden by shadows, just to watch her. He saw how she knelt beside wounded animals brought in by the guards, birds with broken wings, stray dogs kicked aside by cruel men, and she would treat them gently, whispering words of comfort. He noticed how she gave food to the poor children who often waited by their gates, offering them bread and fruit with a smile that asked for nothing in return. And then came her voice. Every evening, as she washed clothes by the courtyard well, Khalifa would sing softly, old village songs, filled with hope and memories. Zubari would sit quietly in his room, pretending to read, but really just listening. The sound of her voice, simple, raw, peaceful, soothed parts of him he had forgotten even existed. He began to change without realizing it. The whiskey bottle he once held every night remained untouched on his shelf. The violent outbursts that once shook his house turned into long silences. He no longer snapped at his men without reason. He started spending hours in the garden Khalifa had brought back to life, watching the flowers sway in the breeze, breathing in air that somehow felt cleaner now. And then, something happened that even shocked him. He began asking questions, not orders, not threats, but real questions. He asked Khalifa, "Why do you still sing in this place?" She smiled and said, "Because light must exist, even in darkness." He asked about her village, about her childhood, about her dreams. He even asked her once, in a quiet voice, "Do you believe people like me can be forgiven?" That question haunted him. Zubari had killed, he had destroyed, he had ruled through fear. But now, for the first time, he was wondering if he could be something more than just a name people whispered in terror. Khalifa hadn't preached to him, hadn't tried to fix him. She had simply lived with compassion, and that alone was breaking the chains around his heart. But not everyone was happy with the change. Inside the Mavuno syndicate, whispers began to grow. Zubari was getting soft, they said. The king was turning weak because of a village girl. Some feared this change, others despised it. His second-in-command, Dago, watched closely, his eyes filled with suspicion. He had built his own power under Zubari's ruthlessness, and a gentle king threatened that order. The monster within Zubari was crumbling, but outside, a storm was rising, because in a world ruled by violence, mercy is the greatest threat. That evening was like no other. Zubari returned home, blood dripping from his shoulder, his face bruised, and his steps heavy. A violent turf war had erupted with a rival syndicate, and though he had fought like a beast, the price was high. His men, too afraid or too heartless, dropped him at the gate and disappeared into the shadows, leaving their wounded king behind. But Khalifa didn't panic. She didn't scream. She ran toward him without hesitation, her hands steady, her heart calm. She helped him inside, her arms trembling under his weight. She laid him down gently, not as a gangster, but as a man in pain. Without thinking twice, she tore the veil from her head, dipped it in warm water, and began cleaning his wounds. Zubari winced, but Khalifa's hands were soft, her movements full of care. As she worked, she whispered something that pierced deeper than any bullet. A man who bleeds is still a man, not a monster. Zubari's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Not in years. Not after all the terror he had caused. In that moment, something inside him broke open. A single tear escaped his eye, trailing down his scarred face. He didn't even try to stop it. That tear, so small, so quiet, felt louder than 1,000 gunshots. It was pain. It was regret. It was a glimpse of the humanity he thought he had buried forever. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat in the garden until dawn, staring at the flowers Khalifa had planted. And by morning, he made a decision that shook the very foundation of Kiranzi city. Zubari stopped killing. He called his most trusted men and gave an order they had never expected: to shut down one of the most brutal branches of the Mavuno syndicate. He handed over crates of weapons to be destroyed. He burned documents, released debtors, and erased files that once marked people for death. And then, in an even more shocking move, he began building something the city had never seen before: a community shelter right in the heart of the slums. A place for orphans, widows, and the wounded. A safe haven funded by the same money that once fueled destruction. The city buzzed with confusion and disbelief. "The snake has changed," they whispered in markets and alleys. "He walks with children now. He speaks with old women. He thanks his workers." What kind of magic did that village girl do to him? But it wasn't magic. It was kindness. Khalifa never asked for revenge. She never demanded change. She simply offered love where others offered fear. And that love touched something no one else could reach: the untouchable heart of a man lost to violence. Zubari's name was no longer just a shadow of terror. Now people spoke it with surprise, even respect. But while some saw a miracle, others saw a threat. Because kindness may melt the hardest heart, but it also makes enemies of those who thrive in darkness. Change may bring peace, but it also brings enemies. Not everyone was happy with Zubari's transformation. Deep within the ranks of the Mavuno syndicate, whispers of rebellion began to grow. The loudest voice among them was Zubari's own right-hand man, Masoko, a cold, calculating man who had always fed on violence and power. To him, Zubari's new path was betrayal. Mercy was weakness. Compassion was poison. Masoko began moving in the shadows, holding secret meetings, spreading lies to rival gangs. He told them Zubari had gone soft, that the king of the underworld was no longer fit to rule. He promised them blood, power, and the return of fear, if only they helped him bring the monster down. Then came the trap. Zubari was invited to a supposed peace meeting with a former enemy gang leader, someone he hoped to convince to join his path of peace. But it was a setup. As soon as he arrived, bullets rained down on him. He fought back fiercely, but he was outnumbered. Wounded and weak, he collapsed, bleeding in the dirt. The gang thought he was dead and vanished, leaving his body behind. Back home, Khalifa felt something was wrong. She was now carrying new life inside her, Zubari's child, and her heart pounded with fear. Before she could even process her pain, Masoko's men stormed the house, searching for her. They wanted to erase every trace of Zubari's legacy, including her unborn child. But Khalifa, though frightened, did not freeze. She ran, clutching her belly, holding on to hope, and headed straight to the one place she knew might save her, the shelter Zubari had built with his own hands. Word spread like wildfire. Khalifa was in danger, and something remarkable happened. The same streets that once trembled at Zubari's name rose to protect the woman he loved, the orphans he had fed, the widows he had sheltered, the jobless men he had empowered. All came forward. They stood at the gates of the shelter with sticks, stones, farming tools, anything they could find. They formed a human shield around Khalifa, refusing to let the killers through. "Touch her, and you touch all of us," one old woman shouted. Masoko's men tried to force their way in, but they weren't just fighting people now. They were fighting love, loyalty, and redemption. And that kind of power couldn't be beaten with guns. Khalifa hid behind the crowd, tears in her eyes, not out of fear, but out of wonder. The man who once ruled through terror had, without even knowing, planted seeds of love that now bloomed in his absence. The very people he had once terrified were now fighting to protect his legacy. And somewhere out there, Zubari's body lay in silence, but his spirit was louder than ever. Because even when a man falls, the love he sows can rise up and fight in his place. Zubari didn't die that day. A wandering shepherd found him clinging to life, barely breathing. Word spread to an old healer named Bahira, who lived deep in the quiet mountains of Kalingo. She came with herbs, wisdom, and hands that had mended both wounds and broken spirits for decades. In her small wooden hut, Zubari lay still for days, caught between life and death. But slowly, under Bahira's care, his body began to heal, and as his wounds closed, something deeper within him started to open. In those long, quiet months away from the noise of the city and the chaos of his past, Zubari found himself again. He spent hours staring at the sky, asking questions he never dared ask before. He remembered Khalifa's soft voice, her fearless kindness, the way she had seen a man where the world saw only a monster. Her love echoed in every corner of his healing. He began to see the truth. He had been rescued not only from death, but from the prison of his own darkness. When Zubari was strong enough to walk again, he didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't gather guns or call upon old allies. He returned to Kiranzi City with something far more powerful, a new heart, a changed spirit, and a voice ready to speak a new kind of strength. This time, he wasn't alone. Beside him walked people, ordinary people, former gang members who had seen his change, mothers who had lost sons to street violence, children who once feared his name but now wore shirts bearing messages of peace. It was not an army, it was a movement. When they entered the city, the streets fell silent, not out of fear, but out of awe. Zubari did not seek revenge. He didn't go after those who had betrayed him. Instead, he walked straight to the authorities and handed over Masoko himself, the man who had tried to kill him, the man who had spread blood and chaos. No more blood, Zubari said. If I kill him, I prove nothing. But if I choose justice, I prove everything. That moment changed everything. For the first time in Kiranzi's history, an ex-gang leader willingly turned over his own to the law. It was a sign something powerful was shifting. The city buzzed with disbelief and hope. Headlines screamed, "The snake has shed his skin." Others called it a miracle. But Zubari knew the truth. It was a woman's love that had done what bullets never could. At a community gathering, with Khalifa by his side and her belly round with child, Zubari stood before thousands and said words that would be remembered for generations. If one woman could change a monster, then 1,000 women can heal a nation. And with that, a new chapter began, not just for Zubari, not just for Khalifa, but for everyone who had ever believed that change was impossible. Because in the end, even the coldest hearts can be warmed if love is brave enough to try. Zubari had once ruled the city with fear, but now he walked the same streets with purpose and peace. He sold the old properties that once hid guns and crimes, and with the money, he began building something new, something meaningful. The first was a school in the heart of Kiranzi City, where street children could learn freely, without fear. Then came health centers, where mothers no longer had to walk miles for medicine. And finally, he opened rehabilitation centers for former gang members, giving them not punishment, but a second chance at life. He poured his heart into these projects, naming them under a cause that touched his soul, Khalifa Foundation for Change. It was a tribute to the woman who had taken a monster's heart and turned it into a vessel of hope. Everywhere people turned, they saw signs with Khalifa's name, not just as his wife, but as a symbol of healing, love, and strength. Khalifa, too, continued spreading kindness wherever she went. Her gentle touch and warm smile became a source of comfort for many women in the city. She gave hope to widows, comforted orphans, and supported young girls who had lost direction. Her kindness flowed like water, soft but powerful enough to shape the world around her. When Khalifa gave birth, it was not just a moment of joy. It felt like a celebration for the entire city. The twin boys, Jabari and Kaloni, were welcomed like little princes. Their names carried hope. Jabari, meaning the brave, and Kaloni, meaning the light after darkness. People believed they were born to continue the path their parents had carved from pain to purpose. Zubari changed the way people thought about power. He invited his former enemies, not with threats, but with open hands. He sat with them, shared meals, and discussed how to build rather than destroy. Rival gang leaders who once swore to kill him now worked beside him in peace programs. He didn't punish them. He showed them a better way, one built not with bullets, but with trust. Soon, Zubari's name spread across the region, not as a gangster, but as a symbol of redemption. Even elders in distant villages spoke of him as the man who proved that no one is too broken to change. Children who once feared his name now read stories about him in school books as a lesson in courage, love, and second chances. Zubari no longer needed a gun to feel powerful. His strength now came from the smiles of the children learning in his schools, the tears of joy from healed families, and the laughter that returned to streets once filled with gunfire. And through it all, Khalifa remained by his side, the quiet flame that lit his path from darkness to light. What began as a forced marriage ended up saving thousands, and all because one woman dared to love, even when it seemed impossible. Khalifa's story became more than just a tale. It became a movement. From the narrow paths of Davuma to the bustling streets of Kiranzi city, her name echoed through every home, every heart. People who once pitied her as the girl who was forced to marry a monster now stood in awe as they called her the woman who tamed a king. She had done what no army, no weapon, no law could do. She had healed a heart the world had given up on. But Khalifa never changed who she was. Even with crowds cheering her name, she remained humble. She didn't dress in gold or diamonds. Her beauty wasn't in what she wore, but in the love that poured from her words, in the peace she carried like a soft breeze. She didn't walk with pride. She walked with purpose. She began visiting villages, not as a celebrity, but as a sister, a healer, a friend. Women came to her crying, broken by abuse and pain, but left standing tall with hope in their hearts. Girls who thought their lives had ended were inspired by her journey, how she turned pain into power. Khalifa gave speeches at schools, sat beside widows in markets, and visited prisons to speak to women who had lost their way. Her message was simple: no matter where you've come from, your story is not over. Soon she opened training centers for women, teaching them skills like sewing, farming, and baking, so they could stand on their own feet. She encouraged girls to go to school, to dream bigger, to believe they were more than their circumstances. She didn't just speak about change, she created it. Everywhere she went, people gathered not just to see her, but to feel her warmth. Even children would run up just to touch her hand, hoping to carry a little piece of her goodness with them. They didn't see her as a queen in a palace. They saw her as a queen of the people, a mother of hope. Zubari often watched her from a distance, a smile in his eyes. The man who once ruled through fear now ruled with compassion, and it was all because of the woman who taught him how to love. He often said, "Khalifa didn't change me with force. She changed me with faith." As time passed, Khalifa's name became a legend. Songs were sung about her in local languages. Poets wrote verses about her strength. Stories were told to children at bedtime, not about princes and fairies, but about a woman who turned fire into flowers. And every evening, as the sun painted the sky over Kiranzi, people would look toward the shelter she helped build, the schools she created, the lives she touched, and whisper, her kindness did what no gun could do. Because in the end, it wasn't riches or fame or power that crowned Khalifa. It was love, pure, selfless, healing love, the kind that never shouts, but speaks straight to the soul. And her story left a message for generations to come. Even the coldest heart can melt in the warmth of kindness. True love isn't about perfect people, it's about healing broken ones. And a pure heart can change the whole world. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Let Khalifa's journey be a light for others who may be walking through darkness. There are so many people out there who need to believe that kindness still has power, that love can still heal, that even the hardest hearts can change. You can be part of that change just by sharing this story. If you believe in the strength of compassion, if you believe that true love is not about perfection, but about healing broken souls, then let others hear this too. Tap that like button to show your support for stories that inspire. Share this video with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss the next powerful tale that might change another life. Because sometimes, one story is all it takes to open a heart, wipe a tear, or start a new chapter.
Sangi halo eh. Love with it all. ठीक है करूँ वडेरे दे यार तगड़ी है
ठीक है
घर वाले बहनी बिरा सारे ठीक है तू ही कहता कर सांगे वीडियो अपने एडवांस शेड्यूल की है चलो एक रात घर गुजारी है कौन ही मसला
मेरे को नहीं इतना ठीक है ना वीडियो मेरे हाल नहीं आ रहे
दो वीडियो एक चैनल लेना 4 वीडियो तक बनाने में पोसा नहीं करें तू ना बना सकता एक रात मैं तो वैसे तेरे पर आदत पे हम भी वैसे ही बंदा तू बात तू बजाना पे हमना सफर देख सा रहा बाकी साकू के राज सारी जानते के राज सर वैसे होते चलो भाई कार से बंदा रहे अंदर सारा तक भी ऐसा है ना घर वाले बस यही सारा घर है तो पीछे घर है तो वतन वे शो की वीडियो वायरल थी है वीडियो की भाई वायरल थी है अल्लाह खैर करे से तो सबर आज नहीं आया हमने हासिल ये हमारा ऑफिस है मेरी वीडियो बन रही है क्योंकि मैंने स्टोरी वाली वीडियो पे लगाना है अपने मोबाइल से वीडियो बना रहा हूँ क्योंकि मैंने वीडियो के एंड पे अपनी वीडियो लगानी है और मैं ये सब कह रहा हूँ उनसे शाहजहान इधर आ जाओ आपको वीडियो में आ जाओ आप भी इधर आ जाओ इनसे कहो कि मेरे भाई को आप वायरल करें उनकी वीडियो को वायरल करें मैं हूँ ना आपका भाई
अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस अस्सलाम वालेकुम गाइस आप मेरे भाई को वायरल कर देना और उसके सारे पैसे मुझे देना क्योंकि वो कहता है कि मुझे पैसे चाहिए है ना बोलो
अब आज जवाब तो हो गया आप शाहजहान को बोलने दो उनको समझ नहीं आती ये अफ्रीकन लोग देखते हैं ना वो तो अंग्रेज हैं इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलते
हम मुसलमान हैं
हम मुसलमान हैं वो अंग्रेज हैं पागल इंग्लिश में नहीं बोलना बस आप आ जाओ आपने जो बोलना हाय फ्रेंड्स की बच्ची ये देखो हट जाओ खूबसूरत आगे से हट जाओ वे यार ही ना है ये वीडियो शाहजहान की बन रही है हाँ आपको अंग्रेज लोग देखेंगे आप बीच में ना आओ वीडियो में ये अच्छी बात नहीं होती ऐसा ना शाहजहान
ये अंग्रेज हो गया तुम जो समझेगी अंग्रेज क्यों पर काम
हट जा
अगली बार गुड खेलूंगा तुम्हारी गुड
ओए ना करो फिर देख
हाय गाइस मैं हूँ अंग्रेज अबीरा
अंग्रेज ये हमारी वीडियो बन रही है ये मेरा शाहजहान छोटा भाई बैठा है मेरे साथ
और ये मैं छोटी मैं मियां अरे गाइस मैं मियां हूँ
ये हमारा
गाइस मैं मियां ये मेरा पागल भाई मियां को ऐसा